Hi, there's Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder here with the follow-up video to the top 10 cards that I won't miss post-rotation 2021 with a more positive, lighthearted video with the top 10 cards that I will miss. So credit where credit is due. I liked the design of these cards. They were pet cards of mine, and I had some fun with them, and I'm going to miss them when they do rotate. So hopefully this is a positive video that can drown out some of the negativity that's going on right now in Magic the Gathering. I need to do a rant video about it because if you're on Reddit or Twitter, Magic the Gathering circles right now, with the huge announcements, there have been a lot of moaning and groaning. So let's look at some cards that I do like. Why we enjoy this game so much is just the possibilities that Magic the Gathering has with deck building and interactions. It's still a beautiful game for that, and I'm going to miss these cards immensely. So I'm looking forward to 2021, the rotation afterwards, because it gives us some new cards to work with, and I'm sad that some of these cards also didn't get to see the amount of play that they probably deserved. I think that we had a pretty hostile 2020 standard season with just really powerful cards, and you can go back to see my other video of why I think that we were plagued with one or two decks for so long, because the power level between the cards I'm going to mention here compared to the cards that I mentioned there, you can just see the strike difference between them. So I am more of a synergy player. I love combos as far as synergies are concerned, not really wombo combos in the game, more like combo synergies that actually give you value. Huge value engine guy, so some of those picks are going to make sense in this top 10. All right, we've rambled enough. Let's get on to the first pick. So the first pick is Meyer Triton. So Meyer Triton I decided to pick because of just how many decks I put this card in. I like the self-milling aspect of cards. Usually I at heart I am like a old school The Rock player. So The Rock is a terminology that used to mean just basically any green-black deck, but green-black decks back in the day, that was their mechanic, was really utilizing the graveyard as a resource. And so I've always liked self-milled card to get cards in your graveyard that then you can use as resource. Meyer Triton really hit the sweet spot because the Death Touch and Gaining 2 Life were perfect for that sort of strategy. Typically, you need to be able to last against aggro, and this card trades with anything that can block. It had a tough time versus like Questing Beast, but a lot of the times in the format, this was very good at blocking things and at least trading up. And then the Gaining 2 Life also had a lot of synergy with anything that triggered off of gaining life, or again just helped you stabilize. So a card that got 2 cards in your graveyard traded, helped you stabilize, exactly what I was looking for in many of these decks. Really like ETB effects that then could be used later on. And Meyer Triton just went in a vast amount of decks. So it's going to be sad to see this one go. Typically in standards of the past, we've had a little more powerful engine than the Meyer Triton, but I don't think we've had one that really did everything as far as the Death Touch, Gain 2 Life, and whatnot. So going to miss this guy, or gal, whatever Meyer Triton is, the zombie merfolk. May you rest in peace, my dude. On to the number 9. Number 9 is another card that was just in a lot of different decks, which is Plutonic Unchained. As far as the escape mechanic, I thought the escape mechanic was pretty broken with things like with Uro. This one I think was very well done because it had a huge cost of exiling 6 other cards, and it actually cost more to exile this or escape it than it did than hard casting it. So some of the escape cards, when it got around one of these, it was either too little for escaping from the graveyard. I felt was pretty busted. We didn't have the best ways to deal with graveyard in the format, and I think that's why like Euro just went out of control. Plus Euro was just a huge value engine, did everything you wanted to do. But Plutonos was a design well done. So it entered with 6 for 4. That's a very powerful card. It had a fight mechanic built into it, and the escape gave you that, again, value engine. This was surprising of how mid-range decks just didn't seem to be able to compete in the standard format, and this is just a telling sign when Plukernos didn't see a lot of play. There were some Yorion decks at the end there that did start putting in Plukernos, but it's a 4 mana for 6/6. That would have outclassed creatures back in the day easily. I mean, it was unheard of for a 6/6 with an upside of, even like Hardened Scale as it becomes bigger, and then being able to make it a 12/12 as the fight. Yes, it does lose its value once it does start being dealt damage. But I don't think that was as big of a drawback versus the majority of the decks with having Plukernos just be able to, at least trade with anything, and then be able to have that value of recursion over and over and over as long as you keep your graveyard full. So did like the design of this card, did like how this card played out. And yeah, I mean, definitely green-black is my favorite color combination. Utilizing graveyard is probably my favorite mechanic of Magic. This, of course, hits all those sweet spots. So we're going to miss you, buddy. Plutonic Unchained. All right, on to my number 8. We're starting to get more of the cards that just didn't go in anything to cards that I actually did try to brew around. So I never like looked at a deck and said, oh, I need to build a Meyer Triton deck or a Plutonic. But Enigmatic Incarnation was one of the first decks that I did try to build a deck. So I think Saffron Olive just kind of beat me to and some of the other streamers just beat me to a better iteration of Enigmatic Incarnation. But at first we did try a bunch of different decks that utilized this card. So it says at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus sacrifice enchantment's converted mana cost and put it on the battlefield. So of course we wanted it to work with Theros, where you can go find an enchantment creature and just keep moving up. But again, this was a card that was plagued in a format with the basically Yorion value engine control decks or combo decks, and then the hyper aggressive decks like Mono Red or Winota or even Ghoul at the time, from time to time. They were just so powerful that trying to run like a 4-mana enchantment and not get any sort of value immediately, you could get some sort of, I mean, you really needed this to stay around a few turns before you really got that value. This card was just lackluster in the format. The power level or just the wonky spot that these mid-range decks held in the format just made them completely unplayable. So kind of sad. Wish I would have had a little more fun with this card. Wish I would have just tried a little bit harder with this sucker. I even forgot, when I was doing this list, I forgot this existed. What we were doing to pick the top 10 cards is looking at decks that I actually did make, and this was one I was quite obsessed with at the beginning. So going to miss this guy, or this enchantment, quite a bit. I think it's a very cool design card, kind of like the synergy aspect of this. The building a whole value engine around a card is just catnip to brewers like myself. Alrighty, on to my number 7. My number 7 is going to be the Nightmare Shepard, another value engine card that, again, fits that little mid-range slot that just didn't quite work. Did have some fun with this in like a sacrifice deck of getting Gary's back. So Grey from Asphodel off a Nightmare Shepard, then sacrifice it. Oftentimes could be lethal because you'd curve on turn 4, you Nightmare Shepard, at least have 2 mana devotion on board right there, and your sacrifice outlet hopefully adds like a mana or 2 for black, and so you have like 4, and then a Grey Merchant does 6. You sacrifice it, it comes back, it will do another a bit, because it says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may exile. If you do, you create a token. So the token still remains the devotion to it. And it was more than just Gary with Nightmare Shepard. This was just a good card that worked against like board wipes, worked against a lot of spot removal. If they didn't take care of the Nightmare Shepard, you started to get a lot of value because ETB effects still worked, even if it's just a 1/1. So yeah, its power and toughness might get dumbed down, but you're still getting that value out of the token and now entering into the mix. So this is one I also felt was a better design than something like Luminarch, what's the Moth out of Ikoria, that it didn't exile. So it was just, oftentimes it was just overwhelming with being able to keep recurring. This at least meant you did have to exile those cards and you just got some value off of it. The 4/4 flying for 4 was actually quite decent too. And it's very, very telling of what type of format we're in, where a card like Nightmare Shepard just wasn't able to compete, because 4/4 for 4, historically speaking, in Magic the Gathering was such a great card. A 4/4 flying for 4. We've seen cards with drawbacks in standards of yesteryears see play. There was just a big flying creature, or at least a medium-sized flying creature for a very discounted price. And yeah, just really, really telling of how hostile the environment was for these mid-range type value cards. All right, let's go on to the next one, onto our number 6 slot, where we're really starting to get into the brewer stuff. This is Netherroy, Apex of Death. Tried to make this mutate work. It was a bit wonky here, but it says whenever this creature mutates, return any number of target creature cards with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. This was quite fun in last rotation because there were enough ETB abilities that this could just win the game if you could mutate it and get enough cards back from your graveyard. But we haven't had the greatest amount of cards that this actually worked with, like the Zulaport Cutthroat or ETB type effects that did trigger. There were some So there just wasn't like a universal amount of them to make it work. So I'm going to give this one a go. I know there have been some cards that have been printed out of the latest sets that make Netherroy much more appealing. This card was also kind of weird to find a mutate target for it. The 7 mana, I mean, just think of like Emergent Ultimatum that doesn't have to have any build-up, and something like Netherroy Apex of Death that does require you to fill up your graveyard, have the right thing to mutate in, and you can see why a card like this just can't compete. And unfortunately, that's kind of the name of the game, was they built these kind of duck cards, the ultimatums that really didn't have much of a drawback, and it felt like these ones they tried to balance or give big restrictions for it to work, and that it ended up being very, very lackluster here. But Death Touch Lifelink was very irrelevant in this format. Another one too that you'd think, a 5/5. This is like getting into Siege Rhino territory of value here. So 5/5 Death Touch Likely for 5 mana. Typically in these mid-range later game type decks, you could then curve into them, and then I mean this is after like a cultivate turn, you can go into a Netherroy, but that wasn't good enough. Like Baneslayer Angels are not good in the format; they're just not good, and I wish they'd get back to their balancing formats around mid-range. Like people complain about the Siege Rhino days, and I kind of lust for them. I kind of wish that we were back in those sort of environments where it felt like we could play a good game of Magic and play these mid-range type creatures. But to each their own. I don't like hyper aggressive. I don't like hyper combo. I don't like hyper control. And I think we're still riddled with those type of formats again and again and again with these standard environments we've had. So this one just didn't. It just, as a castable creature, just didn't see the opportunity that I think that it would have been able to see in standards of the past. All right, so now we are getting on to the juicy stuff, the top half. This one is going to be a Yara, First of Locktwain. Love these Zulaport Cutthroat-ish type abilities. Love so this is just a synergy card. So a Yara is going to have, when a black creature enters the battlefield, your opponents lose a life, you gain a life. So synergy with all that sort of stuff, and it's a sacrifice outlay. So going back to Nightmare Shepard, this was the ideal curve. You'd go like a Yara, Nightmare Shepard, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and that was just so much devotion. You had a sack outlet. It also did 1 extra life with a Yara's trigger, and just was just a really, really fun card to brew around. Once again, though, very hostile with Heartless Axe that can kill it, with less mana, with even now Power Word Kill, with the even a lot of the burn spells could take care of it, and it was just such a liability for a Yara. Didn't work the best in multiples, but what I did like about this card is it wasn't terrible in multiples, because oftentimes you could just cast that second Yara, and at least it was 3 mana, do 2 damage to opponent, gain 2 life, which is pretty reasonable for a card. This is also a fun little card to reanimate with Netherroy. Was in most of those type of decks, but the mana got wonky at that point. But did like the design of this card. Did like the the 2/3 body, the sack outlet, everything on one card. Really, really gonna miss being able to have this as an option to brew with in the upcoming standard. Alrighty, so the next card on to our number 4 is going to be the Hateful Eidolon. So now we're getting into like my success stories. So all the other stuff here were kind of the brews that didn't work. So Hateful Eidolon I think would be the first one. So this deck did pilot me to Mythic. My Hateful Eidolon deck, everything is surrounding this card, the green-black Citizen Champion / Hateful Eidolon, Ara's deck. This was definitely the go-to card. The 1/2 lifelink was very relevant. This is a card that could actually block the 1/1s out of mono red and survive, at least if it's the 1/1 double or first striker. And the lifelink was also super relevant, but this was just a powerhouse versus mono white as well. That once you could get your little engine of Hateful Eidolon, then drawing you cards for every enchantment that you kill a creature, and then you get Lurrus to then reanimate cards. Then you have the little engine that could. And I like the way that it played out. I liked sort of the mid-range synergy strategy that this card provided. I know this card does see like Pioneer play, and it flirts with Modern every now and again in some kind of like Bogle's type strategies where you're actively putting your own enchantments on the creature. I like the Hateful Eidolon as a way to have a removal engine, so kind of playing the control shell. It's a great card to actually to hook up though with those ethereal armors, because the lifelink already added to it allows you to race. So this card does have potential in other. I'm sure that commander decks are going to play it it's going to be one of the best one slots for that. So this card really isn't going away as far as options in other formats, but I'm more of a standard player. I like to keep things fresh. I'm not a big fan of Pioneer and Modern, so I'm going to miss this one as it rotates. Speaking of Pioneer, it was just so sad that they printed sets like Ikoria and Throne of Eldraine, I thought that Pioneer was such a great idea, having this kind of in-between power level between Standard and Modern, but it seems like they've really pushed Pioneer as well, that the Wombo combo and stuff is just out of control already. It feels like we need like another intermediate format in between Pioneer and Standard to kind of dumb the power level. Still have powerful options that you can still use your rotated cards, but not quite as powerful as those Pioneers and Modern type decks. Alrighty, so now we have the really good stuff going on to our top three. This one, of course, is Storm Herald, another deck that I was very successful with, was able to get Mythic multiple seasons with the Storm Herald deck. This card was just such a powerhouse versus Rogues. Is also a powerhouse versus Yorion. And so this is in a champion deck, so I called it Champion's Aura deck. I've showcased this multiple times. By the way, I'm going to be trying to be showcasing these cards one more time. We're going to give it one last hoorah before these cards rotate. I have played the death out of Hateful Eidolon and Storm Herald deck. Maybe I'll slightly show them for a quick Tuesday Brews Day or something. But the combo with this is just, I try to stack up. I didn't try to go wombo combo self-mill with Storm Herald. I just like to hook up a bunch of creatures with the auras, and if those creatures died, then Storm Herald can come back and you get like another last hoorah with those auras that got put in your graveyard. So like I said, it was very good against rogues that helped you mill, and very good against Yorion because they're wiping the board. The enchantments typically don't get exiled. Yorion usually exiled your creatures, but the enchantment stuck around, and then Storm Herald would come, and having haste and the ability to throw them all on Storm Herald could often be lethal if they'd like tapped out for a ramp spell or something that particular turn. So this card could just win out of nowhere. It was pretty fair in Standard. I could see how this could have been a problem if we had some pretty busted auras, but auras were actually pretty lackluster in Standard, which is kind of sad for a set that wanted to showcase them. But I think when that's the problem with one block sets, is I think they wanted a lot more auras in Theros, but when they're like, oh, we need enchantment creatures, we need to throw this equipment in, okay, there's no room now for the auras that we wanted to print. So might have been a good thing with Storm Herald, but I did feel like there was a lack of auras to even work with. It wasn't really until Kaldheim came out with the runes that those worked very well with Storm Herald, and was able to make that deck that had like a nice little wombo combo feel to it. And then Storm Herald could be your kind of your backup button, your panic button once they wiped your board or taken care of your other threats. So really like this card. It's a lot of potential in Pioneer and Modern. I'm sure someone will break this someday with this particular card. So we'll be looking for that. Maybe I'll take a look at Pioneer one of these days again, or Modern one of these days, and give it a go. All right, now my top two. What could actually out-top a Storm Herald, you say? Well, that is the Silver Smoke Ghoul. Now this might be surprising because this is a card that sees a lot of play right now in Modern Dredge. But I tried to death to make this work out of Standard. Did get Mythic one season with this Silver Smoke Ghoul deck. So the idea of this is with things like a couple of the cards already mentioned. There's a Yara in there. There's Meyer Triton that was in that deck. And if you could gain through life, you could get a lot of value out of the Silver Smoke Ghoul coming back. So you had that self-mill strategy to get these in your graveyard. You could do some really good turns with just having this free value of the Silver Smoke Ghoul. Really fell out of favor when people were running Exile like crazy. And again, this is a type of deck, so a lot of times my favorite decks are actually mid-range killer decks, so try to build a value engine that even outvalues mid-range decks. That's typically where I like to build in or control. So you have like mid-range that's my favorite environments is where there's a mid-range deck versus a control deck, so they're both trying to outvalue each other, and then I can come in with like a highly synergistic deck that's not particularly like aggressive or mid-range or control. It doesn't really fit those bills. It's just a high synergy base deck. Those are the type of decks I love, and this was a card that always gets those brewers gearing, whatever I want to say here, and being able to get a lot of value out of a thing that has a self-sacrifice added into it, drawing cards. Getting life's not hard. This card was really, really cool. Love the design of it. It does see play in Modern, but for all the wrong reasons of it's just too easy to enable. and get this sucker back. But standard, this was fun. This was super fun. I need to give it one more go at this particular card. Very fun when Rogues was like the top dog too, because they'd help mill your own ghouls, and then you'd be able to gain through life and just grab them all back. And oftentimes it would be too much for Rogues to handle with the amount of value the ghoul brought to the table. So gonna miss this card. Really cool design. I thought it was pretty fair for 3 and 2 activate, come and play tapped. It's very, very fair in like a standard environment. Alrighty, now this goes to my number 1. It's probably pretty easy to predict that. Kudos to those of you that have been, listening to the commentary here and knowing what decks I've built a lot of. This is going to be the Citizen Champion. So very powerful card. Didn't see a lot of standard play. I think that I had a lot of success with this in 2 decks. So this was kind of the engine that got me 2 seasons with Mythic, with the Hateful Eidolon deck, and with the Storm Herald deck. So Citizen Champion was just the value engine. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield in your control, you put a +1 counter on it and draw a card. It's a 1/3 for 3 mana. It was actually very fair in the format because a lot of the removal spells just, once again, had to use less mana to take care of it, and it took a while to get going. And if there was ever a format that punished a deck that took a while to get going, it was this one. But it didn't stop me from having success with the Citizen Champion decks in both the Hateful Eidolon and the Storm Herald deck. And I'm sure that I haven't even scratched the surface of what this dude can actually provide as far as a value engine. And I'm going to definitely miss this card because it's just... It really did everything you wanted to do. Got bigger off of casting enchantments, and didn't even have to be auras, but that's typically where I went with it. But casting enchantments and drawing a card, just very, very good value engine. So Citizen Champion, gonna miss you, my dear. Hopefully they print something in this sort of... Typically they do. Typically there's this sort of slot in Standards of the Future. So I'm not sure. Innistrad doesn't have a big aura theme to it, but yeah. We'll be looking for other value engines. Again, that's my cup of tea. Typically, black and green is where I like to be. And this one hit those bills. So, gonna miss it. Gonna miss brewing around it. So there you go again with my top 10. And we'll give one last hoorah for these cards for Tuesday Brews. I'll just start pumping out content to showcase these decks and see if we can build one last deck with these. If there's a card you'd like to see before rotation, or I'm interested in your own top 10, feel free in the comment section below to let us know of the cards that you are going to miss. I wouldn't say this was a very hard... Like, often there's 50, 60 cards that I'm going to miss post-rotation. Unfortunately, it feels like this standard, there just wasn't a lot of... Like, Thornville Drain had a lot of boring cards for sure. They're just powerful cards. Ikoria was just too wombo-combo-y for me. And so, really, Theros was the set that I... And most of these cards were a lot of Theros here. So, obviously, it looks like Theros was my favorite set out of this mix. So, yeah, good design set, comparatively speaking. There were some stupid cards out of that set too, but nothing compared to throwing in Ikoria. So if you're interested in seeing the cards I don't miss, I'll have a link in the description below to link that video, so you can go check that out and let me know of my salt for the cards that I'm glad are gone. Thanks for watching.